Good morning, everybody. Pleasingly, we've officially passed the 85% first dose vaccination in New South Wales, which is just outstanding, and we're looking forward, obviously, to seeing that number continue. So can I please encourage everybody in New South Wales to come forward and get vaccinated if you haven't already done so. Our double dose has been confirmed now at 60%. We are literally just a few weeks away from having that 70% double dose. And 12 to 15-year-olds already, 40% have received their first dose, which is fantastic. To 8 p.m. last night, we had 787 cases of community transmission, and tragically 12 people lost their lives. And we extend our deepest condolences to the families and loved ones of those who've died. And again, everything we've done in the last 3 months, as difficult as it has been to protect human life and to prevent people from ending up in hospital. Today, I'm very pleased, along with the Deputy Premier and the New South Wales Government and with the expert health advice of our public health team led by Dr Kerry Chant, to announce the 3 stages where New South Wales will reopen. We've already provided the roadmap for 70% double dose, and I can say quite confidently that we envisage 11th of October will be the day that we'll be able to adhere to that roadmap. And I just say to everybody across the state, thank you so much for your patience. It is just this week and next week that we have to hang in there for. We're nearly there. And let's not give up at the last minute. I know how hard it's been because we've all experienced what we've missed out on. And I think all of us will be thinking about what we can do on the 11th of October, who we'd like to see and what we'd like to do. And I just say to everybody, it's just this week and next week. Please hang in there. We also envisage that there'll be a very short period of time between 70% and 80%, as little as 2 weeks, because of the rate of vaccination that we've seen, the take-up that we've seen. So I really ask everybody to exercise a lot of caution between 70% and 80%. So at 80% double-dose vaccination, we can confirm that is when you'll be able to travel freely throughout New South Wales. We envisage that to be by the end of October. So we envisage that the 70% double dose will happen around on the 11th of October is when all that will kick in, and 80% will happen about a fortnight after that. But we ask everybody obviously to stay tuned so we can confirm those details. At 80%, you'll be able to go anywhere freely in New South Wales. You'll be able to stand up and have a drink at a pub. You'll be able to do, obviously, consider international travel and other things at that number. Now, the 3rd stage of reopening will happen on the 1st of December. That is at least 4 or 5 weeks after we hit the 80% double dose. We envisage we'll have at least 90% of our adult population vaccinated by then. On the 1st of December is when unvaccinated people will be able to participate in particular events, and that's when the 2 square metre rule kicks in as well. So businesses will have the 4 square metre rule in place until the 1st of December, and there's a range of other things that kick in on that date. So I don't want to be the party pooper, but I've said let's not think about this as a freedom day, but let's think about this as a staged reopening to getting back to normal. But there's no doubt that for those of us who are fully vaccinated at the 70% double dose, life will feel so much better. Life will feel getting back to normal. And obviously a number of things kick in at 80%, including community sport, regional travel, and a whole range of other things. And then on the 1st of December will be the final stage of reopening where unvaccinated people will be able to participate. Now, the only exception is that for places of worship at 80% double dose, unvaccinated people will be able to attend places of worship at 80% double dose, but that's it. And we ask people to exercise a huge degree of caution. Now, pleasingly, the hospitalisation rate has not been as high as we had seen in the modelling, and the ICU admissions have been a bit lower as well, but it doesn't mean we're out of the woods in terms of overwhelming our hospitals. Technically, we're still looking at our system being overwhelmed in October, and I just ask people to exercise caution there. We know that once we start reopening at 70% double dose, that the case numbers will go through the roof, but what will protect us is the fact that so many people have received at least the first dose of the vaccine, and those people will have that extra layer of protection against ending up in hospital or worse. And the vaccine has been our absolute weapon in fighting this Delta variant. And notwithstanding how hard it's been, when I look back, there isn't a single decision. We don't get everything right, but I don't regret for a second the strategy we undertook. I want to thank the public health team and health and all of the government agencies that work with us in providing us that advice. And I hope that people can definitely see the light at the end of the tunnel. As I said, it's just this week and next week we have to get through. And I'm looking forward to joining those things, to enjoying those things all of us have missed out on. But I do want to stress, and I'm sure Dr Chant and the Deputy Premier will reinforce this, that between 70 and 80% double dose, which could be just a matter of weeks, we need to exercise a very high degree of caution. We don't want to see our hospital system overwhelmed, and we don't want to see our fantastic frontline staff go through all that stress of having to deal with people who are going through a horrific stage of illness. Again, a huge thanks. We're nearly there, and I want to thank everybody who has supported the New South Wales Government in putting this roadmap together. It provides certainty for business, certainty for individuals, and later this week or early next week we'll also be talking about some other details around what tracking and tracing and quarantine might look like during that time, between 70 and 80%, and also providing some further detail on compliance activity. Dr Chant will now give the health update. The Deputy Premier will talk in more detail around the aspects of the roadmap, including in particular in the regions. And I want to thank him and everyone who's been involved in supporting us putting together this roadmap for the people of New South Wales. And as the Premier, I can't feel prouder of the way in which the vaccination rates have gone. I think if you look at world experience anywhere, from where we were to where we've come, the way in which everybody's rallied together, and even though we've had some really difficult days, the people of New South Wales have stood together to achieve this outstanding result, and will now stand together as we move forward to enjoying those things in life we've been excluded from for too long. Thank you.
So New South Wales has reported 787 locally acquired cases of COVID in the 24 hours to 8 p.m. last night, and there was one overseas acquired case. We had 93,577 COVID tests reported to 8 p.m. last night, and can I urge the community, please continue to come out and get tested. It is critical that we find as many cases of COVID in the community as possible so that we can implement those public health measures. Knowing that you have COVID is important for you, but it also is important for your family and your loved ones. In terms of ICU, we have currently 214 cases in ICU, and again to re-emphasise, all age groups are represented in ICU, so it is critical that we continue to take COVID seriously. In terms of sewage detections, we've had sewage detections in Grafton North and South, and Wardell on the north coast, and Dareton in the far west. And in addition to the areas that I'm most concerned about, we are seeing increasing case numbers in areas around Newcastle, Muswellbrook, Singleton, and Newcastle in general. And we're also seeing cases increase in the Illawarra, particularly Wollongong and Shell Harbour. We also are seeing cases in Central Coast. So whilst a number of the cases are still arising from those areas of southwestern Sydney and Western Sydney, we are seeing these increased cases both in regional areas as well, in Western New South Wales, and again in that Hunter, Central Coast and Illawarra region. As the Premier had indicated, tragically, we have to report 12 people with COVID have died, 6 men and 6 women. 4 people were in their 60s, 2 were in their 70s, 4 were in their 80s and 2 were in their 90s. 6 were not vaccinated, 5 people had received 1 dose and 1 person had received 2 doses. I just want to extend my sincere condolences to those who have lost their loved ones to COVID. On a positive note, it is so pleasing to see the vaccination coverage rates increase markedly, but there is more work to be done. Vaccine supply has increased through pharmacies with access to Moderna as well as AstraZeneca, and also with increasing access through our general practice system to Pfizer. I would urge everyone to make an appointment and to assist their loved ones or assist their friends or assist anyone who may be having difficulty getting to an appointment for a vaccine. Now is the time to reach out to all of your circle and ensure that you support everyone to get vaccinated, particularly urging the 16 to 39-year-olds to get vaccinated. that age group has not had the opportunity for access to the vaccine for as long as other age groups, but we also know they are important contributors to the transmission of the virus. It's because they're often the key parts of our workforce, they're very mobile, and they're also socially connected. So please, can I urge, I would be very pleased to see that 16 to 39-year-old age group in particular increase rapidly. It is high now, but I actually want to see it get up to that 90% as soon as possible. Thank you.
Good morning. Can I also start by offering my condolences to those that lost loved ones overnight. Today, the Premier has outlined the three-stage roadmap for New South Wales, our blueprint for freedom right across the state. We previously have announced the 70% roadmap, and that will, we believe, kick in on the 11th of October. The only change to the 70% roadmap will be that we are now moving regional travel, so those in Greater Metro Sydney travelling to the regions not until we get to 80%. So that will be a change that was originally flagged at 70% no longer. It will actually start at 80%. The changes from 70 to 80% in the roadmap are really 5 key areas: community sport, 10 visitors to the home, of course, vertical drinking, which is something that we know as we head into spring and summer, it's something that the public would like to see. No caps on funerals and weddings, and no caps on personal services such as hairdressers. So that is the key change, again, for the 80% roadmap. And as the Premier touched on, our final stage on the 1st of December, which takes us about 4.5 weeks beyond the 80% mark, that's when we release all restrictions and we apply a 2 square metre rule across the board and allow a level of freedom for both vaccinated and unvaccinated. The message to the unvaccinated is that you will not achieve any further freedom unless you get vaccinated. And a further and final message to regional New South Wales. There are parts of regional New South Wales that are currently open. The 70% roadmap does apply to the whole state. So there will be individuals in regional rural New South Wales who choose not to be vaccinated who will lose their freedoms on the 11th of October. So my message to everybody in regional and rural New South Wales is to continue to get vaccinated. We're seeing vaccination rates climb right across the state, including the regions, which I'm very proud of, and I say thank you to those regional communities. We have a number of walk-in clinics without bookings right across the state. Of course, with Moderna coming online, the additional Pfizer supply and AstraZeneca in abundance, there is no excuse in regional and rural New South Wales not to get vaccinated. So again, my call out to the regions, let's keep climbing with those vaccination rates. Fantastic numbers so far, but let's not fall behind, because Freedom Day is only a couple of weeks away. Thank you.
Premier, Mr Barilaro just said that the message to the unvaccinated is that you will not achieve any further freedom until you get vaccinated. But under this plan, on the 1st of December, anti-vaxxers will have exactly the same freedoms as everybody else, and a raft of more freedoms will be introduced.
But it's very important to note that unlike most places in the world, if you're not vaccinated, you'll have to wait at least 4 or 5 weeks after we've already hit the 80% double dose rate in order to participate in things that the rest of us can participate in. We anticipate, fingers crossed, by the time that third stage of reopening happens on the 1st of December, we anticipate, I mean, Dr. Chant have got our fingers crossed to have 93% of our adult population completely vaccinated. So that is a big high jump for people to have to go through if you're not vaccinated. The message is, if you want to be able to have a meal with friends, if you want to welcome people into your home, you have to get vaccinated. That's a simple message. And if you don't, if you choose not to, that's okay, but you'll have to wait a long time before you can participate in other activity. In most other places in the world, the rate is lower, that people have to wait less if they're not vaccinated. We're taking a very conservative approach. We don't want to overwhelm our hospital system. We need to be clear that once we start reopening at 70% double dose, our case numbers will increase. There'll be more mobility, more activity, but what will protect us is that rate of vaccination. And I personally will take personal responsibility when I'm meeting with my parents, even though we're all fully vaccinated, because the vulnerable are still prone to getting the disease and ending up in hospital. And we need to make sure that all those safety measures are in place. So the strongest message to those that are unvaccinated is you're going to have to wait weeks and weeks and weeks. In fact, you're going to have to wait several months before you can do anything. I mean, most of us who are fully vaccinated will be able to participate in community life, in hospitality in 2 weeks' time. Those of you who are unvaccinated will have to wait at least another couple of months before that happens.
Can I just follow up on that, Premier? What if a business wants to restrict trade to people who are only vaccinated. Previously, you've indicated that businesses can do that. Under this plan, can a business block anti-vaxxers or people who don't have the jab from coming into their pub or restaurant from 1 December?
Some businesses have already indicated, whether they're an airline or whether they're hospitality sector, some businesses have already said that they don't want to accept unvaccinated patrons, and certainly all their staff will be vaccinated. So after that 1 December date, it will really be up to the business as to what decisions they take. But certainly government has provided certainty now for businesses. Can I stress that the 4 square metre rule will be in place until the 1st of December? So even though we are opening up in a staged way, we still all have to be on guard. And can I please caution people, between 70% and 80% double dose, we need to be careful all the time, but extremely careful during that time. We have to respect the rules we have in place to make sure we don't have such a surge in cases that our hospitals become overwhelmed. I'm so pleased with the way in which we've managed things to date. It's always a heartfelt tragedy when people lose their lives, but we've seen what we've seen compared to what we would have seen had we not taken those measures we did is far less than what we would have anticipated. And that's why I just say to people, that's why I'm not someone who's going to call 11th of October Freedom Day. It's a 3-stage reopening. And what I'm especially excited about is having thousands of Aussies come home through Sydney Airport, is having families reunite, is the prospect of people having a Christmas with those who love the most. And I urge my colleagues in other states to consider on compassionate grounds what Australians have been excluded from. I get letters every day from people who've not met their grandkids, ever. From people who've not seen major milestones in their families' lives. And we want to stop that. Living with COVID won't be easy, but it's incredibly manageable if you do it properly. And I just urge everybody to remember that, and urge all of my colleagues in other states to have that in mind. I hope New South Wales will show the way to the nation as to what is possible in living with COVID, and doing it in a responsible, cautious but also compassionate way, because we don't know how many years this disease will be around for, and we need to get to that COVID normal. And we believe that by the 1st of December we'll be at that COVID normal state, where hopefully also we'll be booking our international travel. Once the PM gives the green light, we'll be able to go overseas as well. And I don't want it to be the case that I'll be able to go overseas before I'll be able to go to Perth. I hope that Australia will open up together once we get to those double dose figures, and that we'll be able to, as one nation, move freely within our own country, as well as have the opportunity to go overseas.
Are you confident that you're on solid legal ground stopping unvaccinated people from doing all these things? And is it businesses who will have to wear that legal risk?
Look, there are always exceptions to people who have very strong views on things, and I accept that. But when we have 85.5% of our adult population already signed up to vaccination, that gives us incredible confidence. And look, I appreciate people have views. It's a democracy. But when the vast, vast majority of the public has rolled up their sleeves and said we want to keep ourselves, our loved ones and the broader community safe, that augurs incredibly well for us. And of course there'll be people who feel strongly about these matters, but our responsibility as a government is to keep the community safe, is to keep businesses a going concern. And we know that so many businesses have literally hung on by a thread, and hopefully this roadmap now gives them incredible hope. They can plan for the future. If they're smart, they might actually even get more patrons, because what we noticed during the previous time we reopened was businesses managed to have rosters, and people appreciated they were at a venue for a couple of hours rather than 3 or 4 hours, and that actually gave everybody the chance to deal with that demand.
Just on that, just on the legality, are police officers under the public health order legally allowed to ask someone for their vaccine status? Because there's concern today that there's a case today that showing that, or arguing that that police are only allowed to ask you for your name and address, but not your vaccine status.
Oh, look, these are matters obviously that we'll consider to get legal advice on, but again, when you have the vast majority of our citizens who've rolled up their sleeves and got the jab, and government providing good advice, and we know that the health orders stand up in legal settings. We know that the legal system recognises that when you're in a pandemic and it's about saving lives and not overwhelming the hospital system, the legal system supports the measures in exceptional circumstances that governments have to adopt. Now, none of us want to have had to make the decisions we did in the last few months. None of us want to inhibit people's freedoms, but the public health orders have very strong standing because the courts, the legal system recognises that when you're in a pandemic, you're making decisions to save lives, you're making decisions not to overwhelm the hospital system. And again, I appreciate some individuals will have very strong views and want to take matters up, and that's a matter for them. We won't be distracted as a government. We'll do what's right by the community. We won't be distracted. People have those opportunities in a democracy. They're free to exercise them, and that's on them. But the legal system recognises the health orders. They're there in exceptional circumstances. Dr. Chant's often talked about the special powers she has. She doesn't like to exercise them regularly. But there are laws there in the system to allow governments to make these decisions in exceptional circumstances, and I think everybody would agree that a pandemic is an exceptional circumstance.
Is that a message to the courts, Premier? Is that a message to the courts to say that the legal system supports the public health orders? Is that your message to the courts?
It's not it would be inappropriate for me to tell the courts what to do. That's a matter for them. But the advice we have is that public health orders in exceptional circumstances stand the test of time. They stand the test of protecting the community. It would be inappropriate and wrong for any elected official to interfere in what the courts would do.
Premier, on the public health orders, businesses still haven't seen any drafts of those, or their legal...
So I can barely hear
Sorry,
you.
on the public health orders,
Yeah.
businesses haven't seen any of the drafts of those yet, their legal requirements when we hit 70%. When are those going to be released?
Oh, look, obviously we're working on them now, but the roadmap that we've put out...
You're 2 weeks away from potentially reopening.
Yeah, but the roadmaps that we've already put out now, and my strong message to business is what you will be asked to do is very, very similar, pretty much the same as what you did during previous outbreaks, previous pre-Delta consideration. So the onus on business won't be much more, in fact, negligible compared to what happened pre-Delta. So our strong message today is we're giving business certainty that from 70% double dose, which is 11 October, until the 1st of December, they will abide by the 4 square metre rule, that the onus will be on the individual to demonstrate that they're vaccinated, that the penalties we had in place still stand, and most businesses had outstanding COVID safety plans which they stuck to. But I also say to individuals, please know that the onus is on you to also maintain good social distancing, healthy regard to the rules, and one other change that will kick in at 70% that we hadn't alluded to previously is that group bookings will be limited to 20 people. So between those groups, for example, we expect good social distancing, we expect venues to respect that, and it's no different to what's occurred before. The only difference will be that the individual will be asked to demonstrate that they're vaccinated, and we want to see business continuity. We don't want to see businesses open and shut. We don't want to see businesses have to go through what they've been through. But that's why between 70 and 80%, I am asking everybody to exercise extreme caution, because that 80% double dose coverage gives us that extra layer of protection. But what is good news is that today in New South Wales, we know that 85.5% of people adults have received at least 1 dose. We know that 40% of 12 to 15-year-olds have received, that's a couple of 100,000, have received at least their first dose. So by the time 2 weeks rolls around and we open on the 11th of October, the effect of those vaccinations would have already come into place. So we have those extra protections, but between 70 and 80%, which is only about a fortnight, we do ask people to be extra careful. Don't assume that if you're with someone who's double vaccinated that you won't have the disease or they won't. In fact, in the experience of many countries around the world, people thought they had an extra coat of armour when they were fully vaccinated and perhaps had a disregard for the health orders. We ask people to really think about making sure you're still acting as though you might have the disease or somebody else.
And what about, if I can ask, you've given comprehensive detail here on a 3-stage plan, but there doesn't seem to be much detail on what happens and what the protocol should be if businesses, venues get that visit from a COVID positive person. What should they do? Should the employee stand down for 14 days? Should the business close for 14 days? What is that grey area? How are you going to address that?
Now, they're really important questions. The two outstanding, as you know, the Doherty report had 3 things they focused on. The vaccination update, which we've done. the public health measures which are outlined in the roadmap, and the third thing the Doherty report asked us to have regard to is what we call TTIQ, tracking, tracing, isolation and quarantine. Now the New South Wales Health is working on that as we speak, and we hope to be able to convey that to the community as soon as that's finalised. And the other aspect which we'll confirm is the compliance regime. So they're the two outstanding things we have to do. But please know that we've managed to outline the detail in these roadmaps after very careful consideration, after making assumptions about where we're likely to be in a couple of weeks' time with the number of people in hospital and the case numbers and the vaccination rate. So the work we've done to date has been based on all that detail, and the two outstanding things we have to convey to the community are what is tracking, tracing, isolation and quarantine look like once we hit those vaccination milestones, and also confirmation on the compliance regime to support business. But again, my strongest message to business is that you won't have to do much more than what you did pre-Delta, but we just ask that everybody respect the rules, and individuals also have a responsibility to step up and do the right thing.
Will you scrap QR codes?
I'll get round to everybody today.
Those 70, 80 roadmaps, the promises of freedoms, would have been a huge driver to getting the vaccine rates to where we're up. With that December 1st plan, you're not sending the message to people who may be on the fence, and this is a medical decision, so a lot of people are on the fence, that if they just waited out a little bit longer, they'll have unlimited freedoms over summer, over Christmas, over New Year. Is that not sending the opposite idea than what you've been trying to do this whole time?
I think today is a very disappointing day for those who aren't vaccinated. I think they assumed that once we hit 80% double dose that they would have certain freedoms. They'll have to wait at least 4 or 5 weeks after we hit 80% double dose to be able to enjoy those things others enjoy. And I'm hopeful and optimistic that by the time we get to 1 December, we will have over 90% of our adult population double dosed, plus a huge cohort of our 12 to 15-year-olds. And I'm just so thankful to parents. I mean, Dr. Chant and I could not believe the stats of having over 40% of 12 to 15-year-olds have a first dose already when they've only had access for the last fortnight is just an outstanding number. And we're so confident and so grateful that the public has responded. So by the time the unvaccinated are allowed to participate, they're going to be hugely disappointed today. I think they probably would have thought 80% plus a couple of weeks. No, they're going to have to wait 80% plus a month and some. So it's a disappointing day for those who are unvaccinated, but it's not too late. You've got the option. Go today, make your booking, go and get vaccinated, not only to protect yourself and your loved ones, but also the community. And living with COVID will be a challenge for us, but New South Wales, I believe, is very well placed. We know the risks. We've learned so much in the last 3 months about Delta. We've learned so much about our own communities, and we've learned so much about what we're capable of. But we also know that 2 weeks will about be our breaking point. And I just say to people, because I know how tough everybody's been doing it, like all of us have just had enough, including me, including everybody. So it's just this week and next week. That's all we've got to wait for, this week and next week. And then for the vast majority of us who are vaccinated, life will look and feel so much different. And I'm sure all of us are already planning what we're going to do on the 11th of October, first things that we want to do. And I just urge caution, though, especially between the 70% and 80%. But I just want to restate, today's an extremely disappointing day for the unvaccinated. They're going to have to wait longer than they assumed. But that is the safe way for us to have that 3-stage reopening.
Premier.
International arrivals, you're saying you're reconsidering, well, perhaps. Is there any figures that you have been considering in terms of how many people will be coming in?
Yeah. So automatically, when we hit 80% double dose, which is likely to be the 3rd or 4th week of October, once we hit that 80% double dose, we'll automatically restate the caps we had previously to Delta, which was about 3,500 Australians coming home every week. But I'm more than happy to speak to the Prime Minister about bringing home more Aussies, because even today, when we've got 780-something local cases, we only had 1 case from overseas. So obviously, if fully vaccinated Aussies are coming home, there's no reason why we need to even have a cap after a particular number. So I'm all for reuniting Aussies, reuniting families. The last 2 years, it's been nearly 2 years, it's been a slog. And people have missed out on major life milestones. If there's a silver lining, the silver lining is I think all of us have appreciated what's most important to us. And we want to make sure people have the opportunity to exercise what we believe is most important to
Premier,
us.
Premier, regional travel for the 12 local government areas of concern. Does that kick in once we get to
Well, the reason why we made some of the decisions we did, including waiting to 80% double dose, is that so all of us could move forward together. So at this stage, unless Dr Chant's team advises otherwise, at this stage, we're assuming that all citizens of Greater Sydney will have the same opportunities as everybody else. But again, I want to caution to say the Doherty report tells us that if there's a particular outbreak in a suburb or a locality or a town, that the health advice might say for people within a particular area for the next week or two, confine your activity to your local area. Now, we don't have that advice at this stage. At this stage, our anticipation and expectation is that everybody moves forward together. But if there is a major outbreak in anywhere, it doesn't have to be in those. Ironically, those areas of concern have got the best vaccination rates in the nation. They've done it the toughest. They know the risks. And potentially the biggest risks lie with communities who may not have had cases, who haven't actually had to go through those difficulties, haven't actually had to go through living in those difficult situations. So the risk is there for anybody, and that will be dependent on the health advice. But at this stage, our anticipation is that everybody moves forward together.
Premier, the 1st of December.
Still languishing in low rates at 80% average across the state, we'll be able to go there.
Yes, but the issue for those communities with lower vaccination rates is that those citizens and businesses won't have the choices that everybody else has. You won't be able to open your business and accept anyone who's not vaccinated until at least the 1st of December. So some businesses in communities which are open now might actually go backwards, but we've made that very clear. We've made the roadmap, we've tried to provide as much certainty as early as possible. Now, it's a fine balance because you want to make sure you've got the data, you want to make sure you've got all the information at your fingertips, as well as giving people enough notice. And that's the balance we've struck by announcing our 3-stage reopening today. So everybody is very clear on their rights, their obligations, their personal responsibility, but also the opportunities they have. So, as the Deputy Premier and I have said on a number of occasions, some individuals or businesses might go backwards if they choose not to be vaccinated, and that's a decision for them. We've laid down the rules, we've made sure that we've supported people. Even though we don't control supply of the vaccine, we've certainly had targeted responses to the vaccine. We've looked at communities who, for whatever reason, might have lower rates than others, and we've made a proactive, committed stance to vaccinating the most vulnerable, to getting the vaccines to whomever needs it the most. But then there's also a point in time when it becomes an individual decision, an individual choice. And we just want people to be aware what the consequences of their decisions are.
Are
you confident, though, that you've got into those vulnerable communities? The Disability Royal Commission has called on no state and territory to reopen even at 70% if people with a disability haven't had access to the vaccine and disability workers aren't vaccinated. Do you make that same commitment?
Oh, look, we've certainly done everything we can within our state jurisdiction. There are certain areas of responsibility that the Commonwealth has in terms of vaccine, but we've stepped in and absolutely done everything we can to protect those that are most vulnerable within our jurisdiction and within the power that we have, and we'll continue to do that. And we're also relying on loved ones to let us know if there's pockets of people who don't have access or there's concerns about. We've led very proactive campaigns, for want of a better term, very proactive decisions on the ground to support communities who are the most vulnerable, and also spent time talking to community leaders, talking to faith leaders, encouraging people to take up the vaccination. And we're working as hard as we can. We still have a little bit of time, obviously, before we open up completely. And so there's time for us to address those inequalities. But what gives us heart is that when we look at the figures on a daily basis, some of the most vulnerable communities have seen a huge increase in vaccination uptake. Some parts of the state which had very low rates of vaccination are now catching up. And on last count, there are only 4 or 5 local government areas anywhere that have less than 70% first dose vaccination. So at this stage, and there's still a couple of weeks before we get to the 70% double dose. So we have had a proactive position of targeting the most vulnerable. And as Dr Chant and members of the public health team have said, unfortunately, Delta is most lethal for the most vulnerable, those that are marginalised, those that aren't part of mainstream society, those who've got particular vulnerabilities and disadvantages are most vulnerable. And we've taken a particular interest to make sure that we support those communities.
Premier, will QR codes be,
I'll go back in a second. Yes, sorry. Yeah.
This might be one for Dr. Chant as well, but for you, Premier, will QR codes be scrapped on December 1, like you suggested yesterday, when unvaccinated people are given freedoms? And if so, what does that mean for TTIQ, knowing that that's an important part of the Doherty
that's a good
report's
question,
plan?
and that's why we're considering the future of QR codes in the context of tracking and tracing, isolation and quarantine. So they are decisions we haven't yet taken, and they're not decisions we need to take in the next few weeks. We have at least until the 1st of December. Obviously, we'll make a decision way before then, but we have time to consider what is the best way to monitor positive cases, what is the best way to protect communities, what is the best way to manage the isolation or tracking, tracing and isolation process, what is the best way to advise business, vice versa. So we haven't yet made final decisions on the QR codes. It could be a fact that QR codes could be with us until COVID's with us. We just haven't made that call yet. We're assessing the situation. We'll obviously take input from not only health but also other parts of government to make sure we have a whole of government response. So there's a question mark as to how long QR codes will be around for. We know they'll be around for at least until the 1st of December and likely to be there, I suspect, beyond that as well, because there'll always be a system in place until COVID's around to make sure we're monitoring the positive cases, to make sure we're advising people of what they need to do, and also making sure that we keep people out of hospital. Because as we know, whilst to date the Delta strain has really jumped on people who aren't vaccinated, over time those that are most vulnerable will become more susceptible when there's more mobility and people are out and about more.
Premier, the essential worker permits for the 12 local government areas of concern, what's happening then? When are they getting scrapped?
Every setting, if we haven't commented, every setting stays in place until we hit that 70% double dose. And that's why I'm saying to people, we've literally got this week and next week to get through. As difficult as it's been, it's this week and next week, and we know, we assume that we'll hit the 70% double dose number sometime next week, which means the Monday after the 11th of October will be the date we open up. So I'm just saying to people, as hard as it's been, just hold the line for this week and next week. Think about, let's all focus on the 3rd week. Let's all focus on what's happening in the week of 11 October. But let's also focus on how we do it safely. As I said, I'll still be cautious around my parents and others because we don't want to impact the most vulnerable. Remember, it's easier to control the virus. It's easier to stop getting the virus when people aren't moving around. But once we start moving around, once we start interacting with others, the chance of the virus spreading is far greater, and it doesn't mean vulnerable people who are completely vaccinated are completely immune. And we've just got to think about that, and I ask people to start thinking about that. Whilst I encourage people planning what they're going to do in the week of the 11th of October, can I ask everybody to plan it cautiously, to make sure you think about your loved ones and what it means, and also to take personal decisions about what you regard as safe.
Premier, just on domestic borders, just on domestic travel, you said you'd hope that people could be able to travel domestically before internationally even, but is there any reason to have hope that that will be the case? I mean, certainly there's not great signals coming from WA and Queensland still. I mean, what's your message on that?
Well, my message is that by the 1st of December, I'm assuming that other states would have caught up to the New South Wales vaccination rate. Certainly Victoria is very close. So I'm hoping that Premier Andrews and myself will have a unity position on this, in that the 2 largest states representing just over 60% of the nation's population. I'm hoping that that will really encourage others to consider their position. And certainly I think by December other states, and I don't blame other states for not having as high vaccination rates. I mean, when you don't have the disease in the same way we have, people are less incentivised to get the vaccine. But surely by December, most states would have achieved the 70 and 80% double dose vaccination rates, and hopefully by then they can look to New South Wales with a degree of confidence to say, yes, it's been challenging for them, it's been difficult, but they've managed the pathway through, and perhaps it's okay for us to similarly have a pathway through. Because if you open up at 80% double dose without cases, you're in a very different position to what New South Wales will be in. We'll be opening up with a significant number of cases, lower than what we have today. So I'm hopeful that other leaders will see the pathway New South Wales and also Victoria has taken. I mean, Victoria comparably is a couple of weeks behind us. I'm not sure whether they've peaked or not. They probably haven't yet peaked in their cases, but certainly they're following the same path we did. And hopefully that will be a message to all other states that eventually you have to open up. And no matter when you choose to do that, Delta is going to come within you. So even if you have 80% or 90% complete vaccination, once you start opening up, Delta, you can't stay locked up forever. You can't stay cocooned forever. But once you open up, Delta will be part of life. And I would say, let's move together, let's move forward together. And we're happy to wait those extra few weeks for the other states to get up to those vaccination rates. And my strong message is we're going to have to do it eventually. Why not for Christmas?
Premier, on community sport, Premier.
NRL Grand Final keeps
I'll
coming.
do it Ursula, then you, and then back over here.
The NRL Grand Final, I'm sorry, keeps coming up. I know it's
Yeah.
before the 70% mark. There's now a push to see stadiums live stream it as
Yeah.
perhaps a trial. Any chance of that?
Look, again, I'm asking everybody to hold the line. I know there's a lot of things we've missed out on for the last little while. I'm just asking people to hold the line for this week and next week. We don't want to have major super spreading events. We don't want to see case numbers surge before we start opening up. And remember, there's always a week lag in the data. So the 700 and something numbers you see today is really what happened a week ago. That's just the way the numbers work. So I don't want to see us at the last hurdle suddenly get a huge surge in cases and then put unnecessary pressure on our hospital system. So let's enjoy those milestones in a different way until we hit that 70% double dose, and then life will feel so much better. So I just say to everybody, you know, blame me for not having those celebrations, but we've come so far, we've done it so tough. Let's not give up at the last hurdle, to do everything we can to keep people out of hospital, to protect life and to protect livelihoods as well, because we certainly don't want to see venues having to close and reopen once we start reopening because case numbers are surging or particular parts of the community are seeing a surge, and sometimes the surge can occur in a community that's not had any cases before. So don't, just because your community or your suburb hasn't had any cases, don't assume that you'll be able to kind of rest easy. All of us have to be on our guard. That's just the nature of the Delta. But also, we can look forward to those opportunities.
Premier, if I can confirm on community.
Places of worship, they're allowed to have unvaccinated people from 80%. It does seem like an exception for places of worship compared to other places. Why is that safe when unvaccinated people with other people in, say, hospitality isn't?
Well, it's not as safe. There's a risk involved, but that's why we're saying to all faith leaders, and look, faith leaders can take decisions themselves as to what they do, but at 80% double dose, there is that level of coverage, and places of worship are the exception. But again, we ask people to be responsible. We ask people to consider what that means. But the unvaccinated certainly won't have anywhere near the opportunities the rest of us do until the 1st of December, which when we anticipate it'll be 80% double dose plus 4 or 5 weeks, plus 90% plus double dose vaccination. So the unvaccinated, I think, will be very disappointed in the government's decision today.
Sorry, just following up though, why, when we have seen a lot of spread within places of worship, why has that exception been made for places of worship at 80%?
Because there will also be very COVID safety plans in place, so the 4 square metre rule will apply. There'll be mask wearing, there'll be limited singing or chanting. So there's still very strict plans in place. At 80% double dose for places of worship, but that is the one exception, and the unvaccinated, I think, will feel very disappointed because they won't be able to re-engage until the 1st of December.
Just check on community sport. It just says permitted. About spectator limits or any other restrictions, is it considered an unregulated outdoor setting where you can just have 20 or 200 per event?
Yeah, for any part of the plan which requires further detail, Health will provide that detail close to the time. So obviously community sport is one, but what we need to do is give people as much notice as possible that things will recommence at a particular date. So Health will work with the sector to make sure that we have those plans in place ahead of that 80%. But we wanted to make clear that you can't start community sport before the 80% double dose, and just to provide that certainty for our organisations.
Premier?
I'm sorry?
Just on churches, briefly.
It's places of worship. It's
sorry.
Just churches, yeah.
Churches and places of worship. So in place of worship, 2 weeks ago today, specifically after Mr Barilaro said that people could wait a couple of weeks before going back to places of worship if they weren't vaccinated, you made it very clear that that wouldn't be happening. What's changed in the past 2 weeks?
Oh, well, obviously we've taken input from the best health experts as well as the challenges people are going through, as well as a number of other things to consider. And what's really important for us is we not only move forward together, we move forward together safely, but also compassionately. And that's why we've made those decisions. They're not easy decisions, but they're decisions based on the best health advice. They're decisions based on COVID safety plans and decisions based on the most recent data we have.
Premier, once we do this, once we get to 80%, can you guarantee that we won't have a statewide or a citywide lockdown again? I know you've said localised, but, you know, like a 3-month block of being locked down. Is this going to happen again?
Well, certainly we don't envisage we'll ever have a situation like the one that we've experienced ever again. But as I've said, there could very well be localised stay-at-home orders. There could be times when we say to communities, restrict your activity to your local area. So we can't exclude that. However, once you get to 1 December and you've got more than 90% of the population fully vaccinated, the chances of having any of those strict measures are very, very unlikely. But I will never say no. You never know what's around the corner in a pandemic. But we're confident that the measures we've put in place will absolutely prevent us from ever having to go through the last months. And we're also urging now National Cabinet to consider booster shots, because come next year, I'm very keen to make sure those plans are in place, so that some people in our aged care homes, for example, started getting vaccinated from February, March last year. So we want to make sure that we cover everything so that we never have to go through what we've been through
Dr.
ever
Chant,
again.
could we ask you a couple of questions? Can I just ask Dr. Chant clarity on the construction industry at the moment? Are unvaccinated construction workers allowed on site right now, and then from 80% onwards, if there's any changes to rules in construction sites particularly, do they still have to be tested every 3 days? And a quick one as well, should employers be able to employ unvaccinated staff?
So the construction industry guidance is around progressively opening up the construction industry. There's COVID safety plans and there's been a lot of work with industry. Certainly it's not a one-size-fits-all, so a number of larger construction sites have put in rapid antigen testing, and that will we're learning about the utility of that, and I think a number of those businesses have found it's been very useful. I suspect rapid antigen testing in certain high-risk settings will continue into the future. So some of this will be about industry and health and other agencies working on updating COVID safety plans and in terms of our approach. I would highly encourage everyone to be vaccinated on a construction site. I'd highly encourage everyone to be vaccinated. I think the way to reduce the impacts on business is to have a large proportion of your workforce vaccinated.
Opening up to everyone on the 1st of December, even the unvaccinated, do you think that'll slow down the uptake in more people getting their first jabs? And how high do you think we can go from 85.5% where we are now?
If you look at the age breakdown by cohorts on the national website, it's actually really pleasing to see that we've got well over 90% in a number of age groups, and that usually reflects the groups that have had access to the vaccine for longer. I actually do think that we will get to 92% vaccination of our 16-pluses, and as I said, I'm really keen that our 12 to 15-year-olds will get to a similar level. So I'm actually optimistic that we can achieve that in a very short order. I'm not actually sensing a lot of hesitancy in the community, but it doesn't mean that people haven't got questions that they want to have answered. And I would just urge everyone to go to websites that can be trusted. If you're a pregnant woman and you're concerned about vaccination in pregnancy, please ring MotherSafe or talk to your maternity services. It is really important that people actually weigh these decisions very carefully. We will be seeing more COVID transmitted as we open up, and therefore your risk of being exposed will actually increase over this period. And so I do want to be very honest and frank with the community that now is the time to ensure that you are protected. One dose gives you some protection, but ideally you need that second dose, and you need a good 2 weeks beyond that to have good levels of protection. And so please go out now and get vaccinated.
Dr. Chant, there's nothing in here still about aged care. There are residents in aged care that are risk never seeing a visitor.
No. So thank you very much for raising aged care, and I think as the Minister has indicated, we're working on updated guidance to allow visits to aged care facilities. That's been consulted with the sector in relation to vaccinated, but also making sure we've updated those COVID safety plans about suggestions of how those visits can happen, perhaps how those visits can happen in rooms or in a setting where it doesn't expose other people, and how we can actually get our aged care residents mobile and engaged. We are looking through the issue of children, because as you know, there won't be vaccination available for children under 12, and we probably just need to land what's a reasonable approach there, knowing that there will be transmission in children. These are not easy decisions, and we understand the consequences, so we probably just want to do some consultation on the approach to children and at what time, but we are very keen to, we're just consulting at the moment on updated Chief Health Officer guidance to enable visits.
Premier, can I ask you?
Sorry, on the public health orders, in terms of are you still working on those, in terms of the legal requirements for businesses once we hit 70%, do you know when they'll be released?
So they were drafted by Parliamentary Council, draft those orders. In terms of the obligations on business, I think the Premier's already answered that in the sense that it will be similar to what's been required beforehand. I do want to urge everyone to be very cautious as we move from 70% to 80%. To some extent, how we transition is really in everyone's hands, industry and the community. Yes, I think all of us will be looking forward to having a cup of coffee at a cafe, perhaps getting our hair done, some of these very practical things that we really have not had the opportunity to do, and reconnect with friends and family. However, if we can just do this in the most safest way, if we can limit the number of people that you're going to socially network with as we move from 70% to 80%, that would be great. So just try and please engage, socialise, but just try and make sure we limit the number of people are interacting with, because that's actually the true risk that we have.
We should clarify before we go, when does the 80% kick in? The day we kick on 80% or the Monday after?
I think the Premier's answered that.
It is that?
Premier.
Where was it?
Monday.
Premier, will you allow a conscious vote on the euthanasia bill that's going to go before Parliament?
Oh, look, that's a matter for Cabinet and the Party Room to consider, so I'll be consulting colleagues on that point.
I'll ask you about international travel you mentioned. How would that work? Do you have any specifics on that? Obviously, there's an international travel ban in place until, I think, December the 17th.
Yeah.
Is the Prime Minister going to lift that for us earlier at 80%?
I think that the Prime Minister and I have been engaging in very positive conversation about what might occur. So obviously the federal government makes those decisions. But we're very encouraged that certain airlines have already made announcements about destinations they're likely to fly to. So we're very encouraged by that, and that's why we've also started the home quarantine trial, so that fully vaccinated Australians will have confidence that if they do choose to go overseas and come back home, they'll be able to stay out their home quarantine or their quarantine at home, and potentially only for a 7-day period. We're still getting health advice on whether it's 7 or 14, but the trial is for a 7-day period. So those conversations with the Prime Minister will continue. And we're also really keen, because as we know, Sydney is the traditional gateway to Australia. I'm really keen to make sure that we encourage airlines to resume their flights to Sydney, because we've seen many airlines cancel flights to all other capitals in Australia except for Sydney, and even with Sydney we've seen a massive reduction during the last few months in particular. So we want to see that resume. We want to see the future of tourism, international students, because it's such a huge boost for our economy. It's such a huge contributor to jobs. So once we get to a healthy state of double-dose vaccination, we really do need to turn our attention, as we have been, to a lesser extent, because saving lives has been our priority, to the economy. We want the pent-up demand to really help us recover as quickly as we can. We want people to be back in jobs, especially younger people who've missed those opportunities of getting their foot in a career foothold. So if the Prime Minister gives the green light to international travel in December, we will be absolutely thrilled with that. But I'll also be equally thrilled if the leaders of the other states say that Australia should also open up. I know families who haven't seen each other for a couple of years, and that's a really sad blow, and I hope that that will change for Christmas.
Last couple, please. In terms of the modelling for cases, once we hit 70 or 80%, Victoria's released what they expect cases and hospitalisations to do when we do that. Are you going to release those for New South Wales?
We've been relying, in terms of that modelling, we've been relying on the Doherty modelling. So
will you release that modelling?
Yeah, it's publicly available. So this is the point I want to make, that in the Doherty modelling, it looks like we will have, by their definition, a medium number of cases when we reopen, which is between 300 and 1,000. And they make very clear with public health measures, TTIQ and vaccination rates, what that number of cases looks like. So we're relying in the first instance on the Doherty modelling, and if New South Wales Public Health or the health team provide me with anything beyond that, of course I'll make that public. We've been very, very clear on making publicly available any information that we have.
I'm sorry, Premier, but under the Doherty modelling, the TTIQ measures, the public health and safety measures that will be in place in New South Wales when we open up are different to what is in the Doherty modelling at that number of cases. So the numbers don't add up.
The other thing that's very different, though, is our rate of vaccination. The Doherty modelling doesn't assume 90% first dose, doesn't assume a huge rate of vaccination in the 12 to 15-year-olds. So it's never going to be exactly apples for apples, but if there is any independent research which New South Wales Health has commissioned or is commissioning about that, of course we'll convey that. And just on the hospitalisation rate at the moment, we are slightly down on what we anticipated. The ICU admissions is slightly down on what the modelling showed, which is not a bad thing. It doesn't mean we won't be overwhelmed in October, but I'm very pleased that it's not in excess of what the modelling showed. So 2 weeks ago, I know we had 40 or 50 less people in ICU than we anticipated, so overall that's a huge percentage. I'm not suggesting that October is going to be any easier than we anticipated, but I'm just relieved that the modelling has held up in terms of what we anticipated. And please know that whilst modelling is effective and useful, it's not going to give you it's not an exact science, but we're basing our decisions on the Doherty plan, on the network that was provided to the government, as well as advice from our public health teams. And all of that is considered in our overall government decision making, as well as input from Treasury teams on what it means for business and everything else.
And Premier, just on the 12 LGAs of concern, when are they going to lose that status as the 12 LGAs of concern?
Well, obviously, that is all of that extinguishes on the 11th of October. So the 11th of October is the day in which it really becomes life for the fully vaccinated. It's all about the fully vaccinated on the 11th of October. But having said that, as I said, I don't want to raise expectations to say that life will be perfect for us beyond that point. There could very well be times when a town, a suburb or an area, for whatever reason, because they've had a surge in cases, we ask that they restrict their behaviour or their mobility for a point in time. So I want to make that very clear. And the Doherty report actually makes clear that between 70 and 80%, and even beyond 80%, you might have that, to the previous question, localised focus. But definitely it won't be anything to the scale that we've experienced. And what is really heartening for us is we've got that added layer of protection because of the increased vaccination. So our vaccination rates have exceeded our expectations, and that's given us an extra level of comfort. And obviously we're hoping that the supply in October will increase as well. So the feds have foreshadowed that in October we'll get more supply of vaccine, which means that everybody who wants to get vaccinated will get vaccinated. So by the time we get to 1st of December, it will become one of personal choice as opposed to supply. And that's why we're really keen to make sure we made the vaccine accessible to anybody who wanted it. And if there are any issues, that will be dealt with in the next month.
There are dozens of exposure sites in Port Macquarie. Are we considering a lockdown in Port Macquarie?
The health authorities are giving us advice on it this afternoon.
This Arvo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks everybody.